great honor for me to introduce to you today Carly Fiorina. She needs no real introduction to any of us. Obviously, she was a top contender for the Republican nomination in the last presidential election. Prior to that, she was a challenger of Barbara Boxer for the Senate seat there in California. Came very close to beating an incumbent Democrat for many, many years. Her career in business truly was historic. She began her business career at AT&T, and in 1995, she became the executive vice president for Lucent Technologies, which I believe spun off from AT&T, and then later in 1999 became president of Hewlett-Packard Corporation. She made history twice in those last 2 years. In 1998, Fortune declared her to be the most powerful woman in business. And in 1999, in fact, she was the only woman, the first woman to lead a Fortune top 20 corporation. But Carly's career is not just simply political and in business. She really embodies the faith in the work that she is doing now. She currently is head of Carly Fiorina Enterprises and Unlocking Potential Foundation, where she is working with people throughout the United States and the world to help them develop their problem-solving skills, their entrepreneurial capabilities, so that they can become not only more productive and creative for themselves, but to be able to contribute more to society in general. She has also been the director and the chair of many boards of advisors, many boards of directors, one of which I was privileged to serve on with her in Washington, D.C. here. And she's going to be speaking to us today on the theme of work and spirituality, a great theme for a person of great faith and, of course, great accomplishment. Carly Fiorina. For being here.
Thank you so much for the very gracious introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. You know, when I put this cross on this morning, I was reminded of my mother because this was my mother's cross. Actually, it was her mother's cross before that, but her mother died when she was but 10, and this became a treasured possession for her. But I was reminded of something that she said when I was a little girl. She was my Sunday school teacher when I was around 8, and one Sunday morning she said to me and my fellow classmates, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." I must say that I did not feel very gifted as a child or as a young woman, but everyone seemed, smarter, prettier, more capable, more confident than I was. But her words were something of a promise to me that I had gifts somewhere, and they were also a challenge to me that I needed to find them and I needed to use them. Many, many years later, in 2016, as a matter of fact, when I was running for president, I was asked by someone on The View who didn't really care for my politics. I was asked by a lovely woman. She said, "Carly, I really like you." She sounded surprised, I must say. "I really like you. Why are you a conservative?" And so I answered by telling her everything that I had learned in the previous 50 years. I said, everyone is gifted by God. All of us have potential beyond what we realize. No one of us is any better than any other one of us. Each of us, regardless of our circumstances, is capable of a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. And yet, it is also true that each of us also needs someone to lift us up. I certainly have. Someone to give us a helping hand. I certainly have. Someone to give us a chance, or maybe 2 or 3. I went on to say that there are those who, while professing sympathy for others' circumstances, really believe that some are better than others. Some are more blessed than others. And so some of us must take care of others. And that this failure on the part of some to see value and potential in others regardless of circumstances is not compassion. It is disrespect and disregard. When I started out in the work world, many, many years ago, my resume read, medieval history and philosophy major, law school dropout. I was a medieval history and philosophy major, and while I graduated from a fancy school, Stanford University, I was literally all dressed up with nowhere to go, because where do you go with a medieval history and philosophy degree? I've never regretted that degree, but it wasn't exactly something that would get you a great job. And so I went on to law school, and I discovered very quickly that I hated law school. And so I quit. I had the presence of mind to quit before the first exam, but nevertheless, I quit. And I, of course, had to go back and earn a living. And it was a time of deep recession, and my resume wasn't exactly sparkling. And so I went back doing full-time what I had done part-time to put myself through school. I was in college what used to be known as a Kelly girl. We don't call them Kelly girls anymore. It's politically incorrect. Now it's Kelly temporary personnel, but nevertheless, we were mostly women who did temporary office work. I was a good typist. I could answer the phones well. I was good at administrative work. I will pause and say that I am sobered, as we all got. Did all of you get the presidential alert on your cell phone at 2:15, right? Wow, technology's come a long way, but I am sobered to recognize that my granddaughters have no idea what I'm talking about when I say I typed and I filed. In any event, that's what I did. I was hired as the receptionist for a 9-person real estate firm. I was grateful for the job, and so I tried to do it with excellence. And about 6 months into the job, 2 men who worked there came up to my desk and said, you know, we've been watching you, and we think you could do more than type and file. Do you want to know what we do? That was my introduction to business. It was through their encouragement that eventually I would go on to get an MBA, but in fact, it was much more than that. Something that it took me many years to understand. What, in fact, those 2 men had done for me was see something in me that I didn't know was there. They saw potential and possibilities in me. And because they saw those things, I saw them in myself. Many years later, several years later, I landed in AT&T as an entry-level salesperson, having gotten my MBA, and I was in a man's world in a business I didn't really understand. I had no goal to rise in the corporate ladder. Frankly, my goal was to keep my job. But everywhere I looked, I found problems, and I found people who knew something about the problem. And so I started working with others to solve problems. And in the course of doing that, I realized that people all around me had enormous potential and tremendous gifts, even if they didn't realize it at the time. I could tell you many stories, but I'll just tell you one. I'll tell you the story of Jim, an engineer. He was what you would call predictable, steady, solid, but most people also would have called him average and mediocre, and people looked past him all the time. He came into work at the same time every day. He ate his lunch at the same time. He went home at the same time. Nothing very remarkable about Jim. And so people overlooked him. One day I was talking to Jim, I was his new boss, and I asked him if he saw any problems in the work that he did, and he said yes, he did. That I won't drag you through the details, but suffice it to say that he designed circuits, and then we were billed for those circuits, and he said, you know, the bills don't match my designs. It wasn't his job to worry about that. It was accounting's job. But I said, well, what do you think we ought to do about that? And he said, I think we ought to check the bills. So I said, okay, let's check them. And Jim saved us $300 million in a single year. Now, maybe it's easy to imagine that a young woman with a Stanford diploma and two very caring parents has potential. And maybe if it's even easy to imagine that a man with an engineering degree in corporate America has potential. So let me tell you a story that might be a little harder to believe, but is nevertheless true. Several years ago, before I ran for president, I was chairman of an organization called Opportunity International. Opportunity International is a Christian-based microfinance organization. Microfinance, as you may know, is the process of lending extremely poor people very small amounts of money so that they can learn to become entrepreneurs and work to lift themselves and their families out of poverty. And so after a global board meeting, which we held in New Delhi, India, I said that I would like to visit with some of our clients. And so we traveled to the slums of New Delhi because that's where our clients were. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to the slums of New Delhi, but if you want to see grim and desperate circumstances, that's what you will see. Mountains of trash and marauding animals and sewage in the streets and people piled on top of each other. It is a grim set of circumstances. And as I climbed up a rickety ladder to get to a rooftop to sit down with 10 of our clients, I steeled myself because I thought that I would see grim and desperate people. But it's not what I saw. I saw 10 women, they were all women. I saw 10 women who had pride in their faces and hope in their eyes. They were determined. They sat erect. And one woman in particular, I asked her to tell me her story, and she told me this, that she came from a very traditional culture, a very traditional family, and in her culture and in her family, women didn't do this. Women didn't become entrepreneurs. And so when she was first offered the opportunity to get training and to receive a small loan to perhaps start a business to help lift her family out of desperate poverty, everyone she knew said, no, no. Women don't do this. Her husband said no. Her parents said no. Her in-laws said no. And yet somehow the fear, and it was real fear, the fear of going against her culture and her family and everything she had ever been taught. Somehow her fear of doing that was eclipsed after about a year by her fear of continuing to live the way she was. And so she took the loan. I asked her, how does your family feel now? And she said, oh, they're happy they all work for me. The truth is, when I sat on that roof and looked in those women's eyes, I realized that we had done far more. The wonderful people of Opportunity International had done far more than give these women a loan. They had done far more than teach them how to start a business. What they had done, first and foremost, was what those two men had done for me so many years ago, what all of us need. What they had done was look each of those women in the eye and say, you have value. You can live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. None of us as human souls are defined by the circumstances in which we find ourselves, or we should not be. We will give you a helping hand, and because we see you for what you are and for what you can be, because we see you as gifted by God, as all of us are, We know that you are filled with the strength that you do not know you have, and you are capable of far more than you realize. All my life, I have learned over and over and over again that indeed each of us are gifted by God, that all of us have potential and possibility, that none of us should be, none of us must be defined by our circumstances. And it is that belief that has been at the center of the way I have led and built high-performing teams. It is at the center of the work I do at Carly Fiorina Enterprises, which is to provide training, problem-solving skills, and leadership development in the for-profit world, and the work that we do in unlocking potential, which is focused primarily on the nonprofit world. I believe problem-solving skills can be taught and potential can be unleashed. To the homeless person in the homeless shelter in DC, to the disabled student in an Easter Seals classroom, each of us have potential more than we realize. I'm often asked at the conclusion of a speech when I'm taking Q&A, what's the one piece of advice that I would give young people? And I know we have students here today. And what I would say, what I always say to young people is, get a job. Any job. It doesn't matter if it's the perfect job. It doesn't matter if you think it's the right job based on your training or your degree. Just get a job, any job, and do it with excellence and pride. And while you do that job, whatever it is, with excellence and pride, you will learn things about yourself, you will learn things about the people around you, and you will learn skills that will help you when you get the next job. And when you do your work with excellence and with pride, at some point, opportunity is going to knock on the door, and at that point, you can't be afraid to answer it. Every time I give that answer, people usually applaud. And I've often thought about, why is that? Why do people, whether they're young people or their parents, why do people instantly respond to get a job, any job? It's not just because parents are afraid their kids will never leave the house. It's more than that. It's because we all know, intuitively, instinctively, we all know that work is central to a good life. We all know that any kind of work provides three essential elements to a life of dignity and purpose and meaning, elements that we all need. First, work provides structure to our lives. And as any parent will tell you, a priest will tell you, a psychologist will tell you, people need structure in their lives. Work provides structure. Work also provides accountability. There is something you need to get done. And people actually need accountability. They need to feel that there is something they must do to deliver for someone else. A priest, a parent, a psychologist will tell you that as well, a teacher. And finally, work of any kind provides connection. The opportunity to interact with other people, to learn from other people, to discover other people, maybe to discover something about yourself. Work, any work, provides structure and accountability and connection. And these are things that each and every human being needs. There's an old-fashioned expression, idle hands are the devil's tool. And of course, there's a lot of truth to that expression. Without work, meaningless days drift by into weeks and months and years. Self-confidence and pride are eroded until perhaps they're gone altogether. Connections are lost. Work is central to a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. Everyone, regardless of their circumstances, has gifts and potential. And so all of us regardless of our circumstances, need work as part of our life. There are obvious implications of that. Obvious implications for us as people who care about policy, for us as people and individuals. So I want to tell you two stories about people that have made me think about the policy implications. You will hear politicians, as you know, say work requirements need to be part of welfare reform. I certainly agree with that. You will also hear politicians say it's important so that we can save some money. And I always say, no, it's not about saving money, it's about saving lives. But if we care about work, we have to be honest about the programs as we structure them and think about whether or not we're really encouraging work or are we discouraging work. I'll tell you a story of a mother I met in a diaper bank. Diapers are not covered by a lot of programs. Certainly they're not covered by food stamps, and diapers are really expensive. And so diaper banks do a brisk business in this country, and when I was chairman of an organization called Good 360, which is the largest product philanthropy organization in the world, we provided a lot of diapers to diaper banks. This woman was a single mom with 2 kids, and she came to the diaper bank as she did every week. And we started talking on the other side of this circle. We were having a little conversation, I and several women there. And one of the women there actually happened to be an employer. She owned a spa. And she said, you know, hairdressing, spa, nail services, these are great opportunities for women to get into the workforce. And I train them and I offer them programs, and I can't get women to take me up on the opportunity. I can't understand it. I'm willing to give them a chance. I'm willing to give them training. I don't know why I have so few takers of this opportunity. The woman with 2 kids told us how she saw the opportunity. She said, you know, I have 2 children, and they are depending on me. And if I go to work, if I get a job 40 hours a week, I lose it all. What if I lose my job? To me, that is an unacceptable risk. What if I lose my job? My kids are counting on me. Then I have to get back into the system all over again. I want to go to work. But the risk, if I can't keep that job, is so high for me and my children. And we know from the data that in many, many, many places of employment, the last in are the first out. That is to say, the last people hired are the first people fired. And so often, people in difficult circumstances are the ones who are fired first. And so it's not an irrational fear on this woman's part to think that because she is taking care of 2 children, she needs to weigh the pros and cons. Unlocking Potential does work with the Wounded Warriors organization. And Wounded Warriors, as you know, is a fantastic organization that helps wounded warriors come back and re-enter their communities. And one of the things that the Wounded Warrior organization is so proud of is the fact that they have so many employers who are eager to hire wounded warriors, veterans of all kinds, but wounded warriors especially. And so the Wounded Warrior Project, along with their partner employers, holds job fairs all around the country. And the head of the Wounded Warrior Project expressed to me his disappointment. He said, we hold these job fairs, we have employers ready to hire, and yet so often where we expect 100 wounded warriors to show up, only 10 or 15 come. And we can't figure out why. So in the course of our engagement with them, I asked a question of a group of wounded warriors. To me, it sounded like they're afraid of something. That's why they're not coming. I know it's hard to imagine a combat veteran is afraid of anything. These are people who run through hails of bullets, who've saved their buddies. And yet, I've also learned in my life, everyone's afraid of something. Just like that mother in the diaper bank was afraid of letting her kids down, of not being able to provide for them. So I asked a group of people, what do you think they're afraid of? And a combat vet raised their hands and said, I know what they're afraid of because I used to be there. First, you're afraid that you won't get the job, that you'll show up and you'll be rejected. And then you're afraid that maybe you'll be pitied on the job. And finally, you're afraid that if you get the job, you might lose your job. And then all the benefits that you've worked so hard to get, all the work that the people at the Wounded Warrior Project have done on your behalf to make sure that you have your disability check, all these benefits you've gotten, most of them go away when you get a job. And so what happens if I lose my job? Not only do I feel rejected, but I have to start all over again. If we believe in the dignity of work, if we believe that work is central to a life of dignity and purpose and meaning, then we have to do more than encourage people to work. We have to make sure that the programs we have make work not an untenable risk, which is what it feels like to too many people now, but instead make work something that they are rewarded for doing. And that has lots of implications. We could stair-step our benefit programs instead of having benefits fall off a cliff. But it starts with the presumption that work is central to every life of dignity and purpose and meaning, that value resides and possibilities and potential reside in every single human being regardless of their circumstances, and that we must encourage people to go to work and make it an easy choice, not an agonizing decision, as it is for too many now. Now, I'm not naive. I understand that there are people who take advantage of every system, and that there will be people who take advantage of these kinds of systems that reward effort and that encourage risk-taking and encourage people to start down the path of going back to work. But what I have learned is that while there are certainly bad people, and there are people who will take advantage of every system, most people are good. Most people are trying to do the best they can in the circumstances they find themselves, day after day after day. Most people, if given the opportunity, will rise to the occasion. And so, as we think about our policies, as we think about our programs, we need to lift people up. We should not typecast them or demean or diminish them because they are out of work, and we should expect of them all that their hard work and their God-given gifts allow them to do. Now, it's, of course, important to talk about the dignity of work as a concept, as a theory. And it's equally important to talk and debate about the policy implications that come from a recognition that work is central to a meaningful life, and that all work, if done with excellence and pride, can convey dignity. But it's another thing to get out of the theory and focus on the personal aspects of what all of this means. Because we're talking about people. We're talking about individuals. So let's get personal about it. If we value the dignity of work, then we must also value the people who do the work. And there are so many ways where we devalue some people because of the kind of work they do. One of the people who works on my team remembers a picture that used to hang in his guidance counselor's office. And the picture was of a proud college grad on the one side, looking beaming and successful and a bent, burdened construction worker on the other side. And the message was, go to college, get a degree. Now, on the one hand, you might say, well, it's a good message to ask people to go get educated, but think about the message that picture sends of what we think of the construction worker. What does it say when, as a matter of policy, we say everyone should go to college? Some people would even argue everyone should go to college and therefore college should be free. But not everyone wants to go to college. Not everyone is turned on by book learning and a medieval history or philosophy degree. Not everybody wants to study econ. Some people can't find their God-given gifts unless they're working with their hands, for example. Not everyone has the opportunity to go to college. So what does it say to people who haven't been to college or who don't think they're ever going to go that, well, everyone should go to college? What are we signaling to them? And what's the message that we send when we talk about low-skilled immigrants versus high-skilled immigrants? What are we conveying when we say we need more high-skilled immigrants and less low-skilled immigrants? I'm not talking about whether immigrants are legal or not. I'm talking about how we categorize people by the nature of the work they do. And we do it all the time. What we're saying with pictures like that, or language like that, what we're saying is that some work is better than others. And so what we're also saying is some people are better than others. We may not be defining people by their circumstances, but we certainly are defining them by the work they do. Yesterday, I was on Capitol Hill, and I was giving a speech to a veterans group, and before my speech, I walked into the ladies' room, and there was a woman cleaning the ladies' room. It was sparkling. It was perfect. I said good morning to her, and I complimented her on her work. I said, wow, this bathroom looks fantastic. Don't think that we don't notice. And we engaged in a wonderful conversation. I was lifted up by this woman, by her attitude, by the quality of the work she had done and the way she greeted me and how she went through her day. My life was better because she did her work with excellence and pride. I think it's worth thinking about as people of faith, as people who believe in the dignity of work and the essential necessity of work to build lives of dignity and purpose and meaning. I think it's worth thinking about what would our lives be like if no one picked the crops, if no one drove the trucks, if no one fixed the roads, if no one washed the dishes, if no one built the buildings or cleaned them at the end of the day. What would our lives be like? There is value in all work, especially if that work is done with dignity and excellence and pride. There is value in all work, both for the person doing the work, but also for those of us who benefit from that work. And so if we value the dignity of work, if we think work is essential, then we must value and respect the people who do the work, all the people who do any kind of work. There's a saying that politics is downstream of culture. And I think most of us have been concerned for some time about the divisive nature of our civil discourse and our politics. And it just seems like, I mean, honestly, politics kind of feels like worldwide wrestling. Who's on top? Who's winning? Who's doing a pile driver today? And yet, if politics is downstream of culture, and I think that's probably true, it's a reflection of our culture. Think about the nature of our culture today. Our culture lifts up outrage, controversy, conflict, We demean and diminish people in our culture all the time. We love to play the blame game. We tend to lift up fame, not character. We tend to say some people are better than other people. I'm reminded that while we can talk about our politicians and how they let us down, or talk about our leaders and how they've disappointed us, or talk about our culture, that sometimes we need to think about ourselves. I have led a lot of change in my life, and so I've learned something about change. And one of my sayings is that change is a lot like heaven. Everyone wants to go there, no one wants to die. And I say that because here's the thing about change. It's easy, gratifying even, to talk a lot about how something else or someone else should change. It's a little bit harder to sit down and think about how I need to change, how my attitudes towards others perhaps need to change, how my behavior towards others needs to change. And so, as we consider here our spirituality, our faith, as we consider the dignity, the importance, the criticality of work in everyone's lives, both the person doing the work and those of us who benefit from that work, I would just say that we need to be sure that we believe what my mother told me all those many years ago. I have learned it over and over again. Each of us are gifted by God. All of us have more potential than we realize. No one of us is any better than the rest of us. But all of us need a helping hand and someone to give us a chance. Thank you so very much.
Well, welcome everyone. I'd like to go ahead and invite up to the stage our three panelists. You can come ahead and join us up here.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's great to be here. What a wonderful conference. And I can never get enough of this type of thing because it's only through this type of community that each and every one of us can ever reach that universal call to holiness that is our proper calling. When we're working together and sharing ideas, it lifts us all up and allows us to strive to be that human being we're called to be. So thank you for being here. I'm a McDonald's owner-operator, and I love what I do. I serve a lot of burgers and fries and shakes and drinks and all that kind of good stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm not curing cancer. I'm not a police officer. I'm not a member of the armed forces helping out solving the injustice of the world. I'm serving burgers and fries and shakes. And I say that not to demean the job that I'm doing, but my point is simply this, is that there's some jobs where the work itself is truly powerful and meaningful and intrinsic for the common good. The job itself is very, very powerful for lifting up our society. But see, for most of us, we have to bring the intrinsic meaning to the job. See, it's our opportunity and our job to bring our time and our talent and our gifts to the job, to make that job intrinsically meaningful. And I think that's an incredibly important distinction to understand, is that that's how God works in our lives, and that is truly the power of vocation. And so in the McDonald's world, I want to bring the intrinsic meaning to the job, because if I don't do that, then it's merely a transactional business that's providing a service that some people in America think that we don't need. In fact, I was looking on the internet today and I had to laugh. The latest study showed that in any given day, 1/3 of the population will visit a quick service restaurant. So that's good for me, but I'm not sure the rest of society likes that. Now, that's a debatable issue. But my point is that this is my opportunity to serve the world through my 2,000 employees. And if I miss that opportunity, then I'm certainly not living my faith in business. And so we like to talk about McDonald's as a bridge. McDonald's is a bridge of hope for all the folks that work for us. And so it's our opportunity to teach our young folks what it means to live your life, your work as a vocation. And so often our young folks don't really have an understanding of what that means. They come to the workforce 16 or 17 or 18 or 20 years old, and they haven't learned many of the foundational principles that we all take for granted. Understanding of hospitality, punctuality, respect. They don't understand these things, and so it's an opportunity for me and for our organization to help them along the way. And in order to do that, we try to focus on 4 key areas. Number 1 is to give them an understanding of purpose and self-worth. Make sure they understand that they're valuable. And so often they come from Hispanic, poor immigrant households where their folks are working in the fields and they haven't had the opportunities to understand those type of things. They come from many very dysfunctional families. And so it's our opportunity to make sure they understand that they have purpose and self-worth and that the job can add value and give them value, more importantly. Number 2, help them understand the impact of family and what that means to be a healthy and happy individual in this world. And so we try to make sure they understand family and make sure that we harness this understanding of flexibility in the workplace to allow them to be able to live their life. And if they're a Hispanic mom that's home with 2 kids, that she can work in and around her kids' schedule and go to the soccer games and do the things she needs to do to be that mom for her children. So family first. Number 3 would be really about encouragement and self-compassion. So often our young people come to us and social media beats these kids up, beats them up, and so often they don't feel good about who they are and the value they add. They're never wealthy enough. They don't go on the nicest vacations. Everybody else has something nicer or better than them because that's all they see on social media. We encourage them to take risk and to make mistakes, but also we hold them accountable to punctuality. We hold them accountable to appearance standards, things that we take for granted, but they need to understand and learn to be successful in the workplace. And number 4, we want them to understand the power of reciprocity and the power of hospitality and how important it is in every aspect of our lives. We innately want to reciprocate. We innately want to give and receive. And if we can understand that and use that power of reciprocity for good in our country, it would be amazing what we could accomplish. And in the hospitality industry, reciprocity is incredibly important. And anybody in the hospitality industry understands how powerful just a simple smile or a thank you or, hey, how are you doing today? What can I do for you today? Can impact some lives. And I have story after story of that power of reciprocity. And so these are just some of the things we try to talk about with our young folks to give them that bridge of hope that leads them to the rest of their life.
Thank you for having me. What I've come to talk to you about today with my colleagues sitting here is a topic often that we don't pause to think about. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to think about, but I think it's important for us to think about because as Catholics, it's core to who we are and what our mandate is as people in the world. So we're talking on our panel today about the periphery. Well, what does the periphery mean? The periphery means those on the margins. And what does being on the margin mean? Or what does it mean to be marginalized? It's really the process that sometimes we don't think about, but it's the process of pushing people to the edges of society and not allowing them to have an active voice in our identity or even a place in our society. Some people call this social exclusion. I'll sit here and I'll tell you today, Sheila from Relevant Radio said, talk about your own stories. I come from a marginalized place. I had a mother who was incarcerated. I had a father who was an addict. I, at one point in my life, had been homeless. I'm the first in my family to go to college, let alone stay there, and then on to Wall Street. If you stop and think, there are probably people in your own lives who are on the periphery. So when we think about this, we think about marginalization in the world of work, but also marginalization of those who don't work. So let's start at the place you may be most comfortable, which is marginalization in work. We do this by a variety of means. We do it through the use of derogatory language. We use this when we assume that people's accomplishments aren't based upon merit. We do this by expecting individuals to act a certain way based upon their identity. We deny people opportunities because of their identity. Think of racism, sexism, ableism, and all kinds of other isms. And not providing equal access to certain resources based upon an identity. That's how we are guilty of this. But how do we think about these marginalized groups? Sometimes it's just by categories. I mentioned the homeless, the poor being those who are unemployed or underemployed. Think about felons. One of the most downloaded episodes of our podcast was an episode on work after incarceration. That is a very difficult, challenging place to be. And statistics say about 95% of the persons in jail will be out of jail. Sometimes they go back, but they go out. And one of the most effective tools to prevent recidivism is a job. Think about the disabled, physically disabled, mentally disabled. Think about those with mental illness, those with substance abuse problems, racial and cultural minorities, the LGBT community, immigrants, veterans, and I hate to say it, and it's going to affect all of us at one point or another, senior citizens. They all, at one time or another, will feel on the periphery. And so I offer this to you by way of thinking about what the real problem is in terms of being marginalized. And it was referenced in my educational background. I'm actually still writing my dissertation at Georgetown on the concept of contributory justice. And that's what I offer to you today as the fundamental injustice in the concept of being in a marginalized state or being on the periphery. And that is to say that theologically, we're all called to be co-workers with God. To grow and to develop our unique capacities to contribute to the work of the world, where work is understood as activity and action, contribution, not just in the marketplace, but in all facets of life. Philosophers, particularly those who conceive justice in its distributive sense, and which means, is there justice in what I get, are now being challenged by those who think of justice in yet another complexion, which is there the ability to do, to provide opportunities to do and to contribute. There is an injustice or a fundamental disorder when a person is prohibited from contributing. We all can't contribute the same, but we all are unique, have a unique purpose in the world. And that purpose is to contribute to the best of our own capacities. And there's injustice when we're not afforded the opportunity to do that. And how does that happen? Well, that happens when we don't have access to safe communities. We don't have access to a base level of health care. We don't have access to stable families. All those things that help a human being develop into the person that he or she is supposed to be. And so we feel this marginalization in the world of work when we don't treat hardworking employees in a way that say it a different way. When the treatment of hardworking employees those employees aren't encouraged to advance. We see them as just doing their job, but we don't encourage them to do more. We aren't mentoring or counseling our employees to be in a better position within the organization. We take them for granted because they're dependable or because they're productive. We don't often think about that when we think about the periphery or who's on the margins. And perhaps there's also the situation where we overlook others while we're giving preferential treatment to someone else. So in all those ways, people in the world of work can be marginalized. What does it feel like to be marginalized? Perhaps you've felt this way from time to time in your own career. You feel disengaged, in fact, because you're not contributing. In fact, a recent Gallup poll reported that About 70% of employees in their survey on this subject said that they didn't feel engaged in work, which would suggest that 3 of 10 do. So I think we can do better. If an employee feels disengaged in work, he or she feels like a commodity, and particularly not a very valued commodity. Not only does that employee suffer, but the employees throughout the company suffer, and the company suffers itself. If employees don't feel like they're being taken seriously by an organization, critical talents are squandered, and productivity suffers, leading to missed deadlines, wasted resources, and reduced profits. That's for the people that we do employ. How do we keep these people engaged? Well, we provide them with professional development at all levels, not just those at the earlier levels or earlier stages in their careers, but all throughout their career so they can continue to grow and to develop. We also encourage team feedback by evaluating employees, because remember, managers aren't always privy to employees' performance in the way that their coworkers are. We also give team leaders the flexibility to make changes, because sometimes good employees are in a good company, but they might not be in the right place in that company. And then we don't limit our communication to text and emails. There's something to be said about not being able to replace the importance of human connection. And then performance appraisals by managers should include specific behaviors that those managers can exhibit that minimize the marginalization of their employees.
So before this panel began, we were all encouraged to tell stories. And I think storytelling is critical. So let me tell you a story. It was just a little over 2 years ago that I had the initial conversation with Bill Bowman, Dean of the Bush School of Business. Bill was a Bostonian for many years. He had agreed to come down to Catholic to become Dean of the Bush School, but he's also a serial entrepreneur. So he reached out to his dear friend, Nitin Noria, the Dean of the Harvard Business School, and said, Nitin, the Bush School of Business would like to use its resources to turn moral leadership into positive action. We have an obligation to enrich, to enlarge, to enliven the life of the community right here in DC. Whom should we reach out to, and how should we go about doing it? Noria reached out to Michael Porter, the legendary business professor at Harvard Business School, global guru of strategy and competitiveness, who reached out to me, and Bill and I had our initial conversation. And it was clear from the first moment exactly what Bill intended. Bill shared with me his belief that to take Catholic social teaching and to bring it into the school and to bring it into the community in a way that lifts up those small businesses in communities characterized by high levels of poverty, unemployment, high levels of diabetes, obesity, food deserts, low birth weight babies, lack of wellness outcome. Life expectancy in some of these neighborhoods, 15 to 17 years less than in some of the communities located only 4 or 5 miles from here, where the people who live in those neighborhoods have way more than the ones in the communities very close to Catholic. So what did we do? We got together because ICIC, the Initiative for Competitive Inner Cities, started by Dr. Porter 25 years ago, is all about the revitalization of inner cities. Porter has always believed that while government can play a role, and an important role, new market tax credits is a perfect example that Dawn mentioned, Porter believes that it is all about lifting up small businesses, privately owned, and the private sector providing the education, the coaching, and the capital necessary to grow those businesses and create good-paying jobs with good benefits that lift people up and give people the kind of standard of living that they need. So we began that journey together. I wasn't sure exactly what to say at the opening kickoff breakfast. We had 150 people in the room. The Cardinal was speaking. The president of the university was speaking. Bill was speaking. And here I was at Catholic University of America Jewish leader from Boston, trying to figure out how do we bring this all together. And I realized that what brought us all together was our common belief contained in Scripture, and my favorite passage of Scripture is Isaiah 58:10. We all know that passage. If you offer your compassion to the hungry and relieve the oppressed, then shall your light shine in darkness, and your gloom shall be like noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will slake your thirst in parched places and give strength to your bones. And you will be known as the rebuilder of ancient walls, the restorer of dwelling places, the repairer of the breach. Repair of the breach. We live in a society in which we aspire to inclusive prosperity, but we fall short of that every minute of every day. And the question is, how do we create inclusive prosperity? How do we give people the tools and the skills to be able to compete, succeed, and win? And how do we teach principled entrepreneurship so that those business owners create good-paying jobs with good benefits? Because as we just published earlier this week, at a 20-year study of the most successful inner-city businesses in America, those that are growing the fastest, growing revenue, growing profitability, growing their employment base, are the ones that provide the best benefits. I ran a company for 35 years, Grossman Marketing. Used to be an envelope company, an envelope manufacturing company, started by my grandfather in 1910. Company became a union shop in 1952. Companies never had a strike, a lockout, or a single matter go to arbitration. People say, why on earth do you pay people in your industry 20 to 25% more than the competition, and provide paid family leave, and provide free home ownership loans, which are paid off if you've been with the company for 5 years in full, no reimbursement required? Why do you do that? How can you afford to do that? My answer, very simply, how can you afford not to do that? Because the great companies, whether they're in the food service business or whether they're in the marketing communications business, are the ones that have superb workforces, longevity, loyalty, deep commitment, a living wage, and better than that, great benefits, an opportunity to provide for a family. Our company, now called Grossman Marketing, 2 employees, one Mike Elwell, the other Eli Davis, came to the company the same day that I came to the company back in the 70s, still with the company 40 plus years later. What does that mean to a company when you can compensate and treat your workers with the respect and dignity that lifts them up and gives them the tools and skills to be able to build a family, to educate kids, to be able to have leisure time, to do all the things that Max talked about earlier with your leisure time? What does that mean? And what does the individual give back to the company in return? And how do you create a great company that differentiates itself from the competition and competes and wins in the marketplace because of the caliber and quality of the women and men who work, live, and hopefully retire with dignity from that company?
An applause for our panel.